7,062 Irish households. 3 months. The highest eviction figure ever recorded in this country. And the law that was supposed to stop this was signed, sealed, and sitting on the shelf before the first notice went out. There is a document inside the Department of Housing that describes, in careful official language, exactly what was about to happen. It names the risk. It uses the phrase, significant concern. The legislation passed anyway. That document is what this video is about. Before we go further, drop the county you are watching from in the comments, and tell me, is your adult child renting right now? I ask because the geography of who watches this channel, and the geography of who is on the receiving end of these notices, I suspect they overlap more than anyone in Leinster House would like to admit. Now, back to what the numbers actually say. Here is where we start. In February of this year, one single month, 3,138 eviction notices landed on tenants across Ireland. The month before, 1,998. The month after, 1,926. The spike is not spread across the quarter. It is concentrated in February. And February is the month immediately before the government's new rental reforms came into force on the 1st of March. That is not a coincidence. That is a calendar. The Residential Tenancies Board, the state body that registers tenancies and handles disputes, confirmed on the 14th of May that the first quarter of 2026 produced the highest quarterly eviction figure since the data series began in 2022, up 51% on the same period last year. The RTB's own director said the trend was of concern and that there had been clear indications that some landlords would exit the market ahead of the new rules. Clear indications, before the notices went out. Let us put a face on what these numbers mean, because the figure of 7,062 is easier to understand when it has an address. 20 families in an apartment block in Limerick City received notices of termination 1 week before the new rules came into effect. Many of them had been renting those apartments for 15 years. The reason given? Landlord intends to sell. In County Wexford, 36 homes received notices 2 days before the new rules arrived. Those were later withdrawn, but only after a doorbell camera recording emerged of the landlord telling a tenant directly that the new rental rules were the reason they were being asked to leave. A doorbell camera. That is how Ireland found out. These are not isolated cases. They are named examples of a pattern that the RTB data has now confirmed nationally. And here is the mechanism that produced it. Explained simply, because the legislation is not simple, but the logic inside it is. The new law introduced 6-year minimum tenancies and capped annual rent increases at 2%. Those are genuine protections for tenants in new agreements from the 1st of March onwards. But the law also contained a clause. When a new tenancy is created, a landlord can reset the rent to market rate if the previous tenant is gone and the previous rent was below the going rate. That one clause changed the calculation for every landlord in Ireland holding a below-market tenancy. The average rent for an existing tenancy at the end of 2025 was €1,503 per month. The average rent for a new tenancy was €1,755 per month. A gap of €252 every month, €3,024 every year, per property. For a landlord with several properties significantly below market rate, the arithmetic of evicting before the 1st of March and reletting afterwards was not subtle. It was there on a spreadsheet. Here is the part nobody is talking about. This risk was identified, documented, and formally noted inside the Department of Housing before the Dáil voted. The regulatory impact analysis prepared ahead of the legislation used the phrase significant concern to describe the potential for economic evictions. The housing agency's assessment said mitigation measures would be needed to ensure that the security of tenants remain protected. Those words are in an official document that existed before the law passed. The mitigation that was included: a clarification that landlords cannot reset rent following a no-fault eviction under the new rules, for tenancies created after the 1st of March. The tenants who received their notices in January and February are not covered by that protection. They were evicted before the new rules applied. Their landlords can relet at the new market rate. The document that said this was coming was written before the vote. The vote happened anyway, which is technically legal, which is technically the problem. If this kind of analysis is what has been missing from your feed, hit subscribe. This channel covers Irish news the way it deserves to be covered. No spin, no hysteria, just the full picture. Now, back to where this lands. There is a leaking pipe in the Irish rental market. It has been visible for years. The new legislation was presented as the repair. What the RTB data shows is that the repair was applied to the section of pipe that was already holding, and the section that was already under pressure burst in the window before the fix arrived. On the 14th of May in the Dáil, Social Democrats housing spokesperson Rory Hearn called for an emergency ban on no-fault evictions and accused the government of having introduced the reforms with, quote, "For Sinn Féin's Owen O'Brien called the spike a direct result of the government's disastrous changes." The government, in response, pointed to the fact that the number of registered landlords rose by 1.3% this year. Evidence, they say, that the market is stabilizing and that supply is returning. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. More landlords in the market is a real signal. 7,062 eviction notices in a single quarter is also a real signal. The question is, which signal reaches the person with the notice in their hand first? For those watching from the UK or the US, this is the Ireland your family is renting in right now. Not the Ireland of the headlines that says the reforms are working. The Ireland where your daughter in Cork or your nephew in Dublin received a letter in February telling them they had a notice period. The average new tenancy rent they would face if they had to move, €1,755 per month nationally, and considerably more in the cities. The pipe was leaking. The document said so. The law passed anyway. What to watch in the coming weeks? The government's response to the Dáil calls for an emergency ban on no-fault evictions, and the second quarter RTB figures when they arrive. If the downward trend from February to March holds through the spring, the government's stabilization argument gains ground. If the figures stay elevated, the question of whether the mitigation measures were ever adequate will not go away quietly. 7,062 notices, one quarter. The record stands.